Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. My guest today is a great believer in economic reforms, but just how easy are they to practice in India, and just how effectively is the Indian government tackling the challenge? Those are the two key issues that I should raise today with former Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics, Lord Meghnad Desai. Lord Desai, in a recent survey, The Economist commented, India has taken off, but only with further reforms can it spread its wings and soar. Without those reforms, its potential will remain unfulfilled promise. Do you agree with that opinion?
Very much so, very much so. India can be China, India can be better than China, but we have to have the will to transform the economy, to pursue reforms, and to not look after vested interests all the time.
Let's be specific. Are you talking about reforms that free the economy, that lift caps on investment, that open up the labor market, and that actually takes the government out of running businesses? Or are you talking about social sector reforms in areas like health, education, rural development, urban welfare? Which sort of reforms are you talking about?
The former, not so much the latter. The latter are essential, but to transform the economy, it's the former which are absolutely essential.
All right, let's go through a checklist of the sort of things that you believe need to happen before we talk about their feasibility and before we talk about whether the government will actually bite the bullet. To begin with, would you like to see greater labor flexibility in India, including some form of hire and fire?
Absolutely.
And would that also be something that would circumvent the manner in which contract hiring today takes over?
Absolutely. Okay. It will be much more legal to employ people if we have open hire and fire rather than this hidden, illegal flexibility.
All right. What about the privatization of India's vast public sector? Is that important?
Absolutely.
And would you include the Navratnas?
Absolutely.
So there's actually no taboo area that would be outside privatization as far as you're concerned?
None whatsoever.
Let's come to something that people think is a little bit more tricky. What about allowing FDI in the critical retail sector?
Immediately.
What about the charge the left makes that you could be endangering up to 4 crore jobs, all of which are in the unorganized sector, none of which are protected?
Once jobs are created in one sector, in other sectors they disappear, growth by itself will create new jobs. The policy of the last 40 years has created no jobs. We need a new policy, and that new policy is to welcome investments, no holds barred.
While we're on this checklist, let me go through two other things that are perhaps just a shade more technical. Do you believe the time has come for extensive banking reforms and in particular pension reforms?
Yes, but I also believe we should have full capital account liberalization.
You really mean that?
Absolutely.
You mean we should have it as of now?
As of now.
So none of the fears and constraints that actually stop people doing it matter to you?
No.
And then what about subsidies? Has the time come to cut them? Perhaps at least target them more effectively so that wastage is removed?
Cut them, if possible, freeze them immediately in terms of absolute amounts of money, and then progressively cut them.
So what we're talking about then is extensive economic structural reforms that would open the economy, remove constraints, reduce wastage of expenditure, and in a sense, free up the entrepreneurship of the Indian people.
Yes, and also reach out to the poorest in the rural areas and in the urban areas who have half jobs right now, who have illegal jobs right now. Open the economy up, and then we will create the sort of jobs that will take people out of the rural and urban misery.
Let's, Lord Desai, look at the sort of problems that this agenda is bound to run up against in India. For instance, the left, including large sections of the Congress party, would oppose it on the grounds that such reforms would threaten jobs, that they would increase income disparities, they would punish the poor, and they would perhaps increase foreign control of the economy.
Well, first of all, let me say that the left, either in the CP or the Congress, basically are protecting the currently vested interests of people who have got guaranteed jobs with guaranteed inflation indexing, guaranteed pension.
And that's a minority of the population.
Yeah, they are protecting about 4% of the labor force, who are the labor aristocracy. And the left right now is protecting them and preventing the much poorer people from getting jobs because they will not let reform go through.
So what you're saying is that, in fact, an anti-reform posture is actually an anti-poor posture, that if you really want to benefit the poor who are landless and without jobs, you have to open the economy, push through reforms, because that's the only way of guaranteeing employment.
I've always believed that the way to help India's poorest people, the landless, the people in the urban sector, is to give them good manufacturing jobs. And you can only do that if you reform the labor market, get a lot of investment in, domestic and foreign, and just go for a 12%, 15% growth.
You're also pointing at a paradox in a sense, aren't you? You're saying that the left believes you could increase employment by protecting jobs. You're saying that you actually increase employment by freeing the labor market, allowing jobs to be lost through hire and fire, because then entrepreneurs will actually create more companies and create more jobs.
I'm talking about something which the British left learned. You protect jobs, you don't create employment. That is a paradox. If you freeze existing jobs, you don't allow entrepreneurs to create new jobs because they're afraid.
You're saying that this is actually a lesson that the left, so to speak, in Britain learned the difficult way. You're suggesting to the left in India, take a lesson from the left in England, don't go through the same problem yourself.
Absolutely.
Now, the response that you're going to get from the left in India is that the only way to create employment is not through what you're calling deregulation and opening up of the labor market and the economy as a whole, but through increasing investment in infrastructure and by increasing domestic demand. How do you reply to their formula?
You see, increasing infrastructure investment, who is blocking it? It is the left who is blocking infrastructure investment. Take the modernization of airports, modernization of ports. We will need foreign direct investment to do the infrastructure reform, and by stopping foreign investment, the left is blocking that. But more than that...
But there's a corollary to what you're saying. You're saying that the left, under no circumstances, will permit the sort of FDI that's needed for proper investment in infrastructure. Exactly. So when the left says, go down the infrastructure route, they're actually being hypocritical because they themselves are the obstacle.
Absolutely. And they always go on about domestic demand. There's an old left thing about the home market is restricted. The export market is unlimited.
But even today, when there are so many other people competing for the same export market, after all, China's already there.
You see, 10 years ago, China wasn't, and we were saying, oh, there are no export markets, you know, and China has proved there is export market. The textile quotas have now been abolished. We had a 10-year notice it will be abolished. Did we prepare for it? No, we did not.
So what you're saying, in fact, is that the export market is not finite. New exporters can expand it, become prepared to export, and the market will expand to accommodate India.
Exactly. The world economy is growing very fast, thank you very much, and India can sell, you know, double, treble, quadruple times the export is now selling.
We talked about the left as an obstacle to the sort of reforms agenda that you have in mind, but do you think, in a sense, the problem is perhaps greater than just the left? Let me put it like this. Whilst it's the norm in first world democracies to follow liberal policies, and whilst you can get away with it in third world dictatorships, in third world democracies, there's a real possibility that the logic of your economics and the logic of your politics could come in conflict with each other, and because economic reform takes time to yield results, political compulsions in the shape of elections could intervene. Isn't that what happens in India? A Narasimha Rao starts a process, elections intervene, he backs off. A Rajiv Gandhi starts a process, elections or other political problems intervene, he backs off. How do you give politicians the courage that actually good economics is good politics, persist with it, don't give up when the going gets tough?
Well, the difficulty is of clear leadership, because in essence, Rajiv Gandhi was a bold young leader. He had the confidence of a big majority, he had confidence of a dynasty. Since Rajiv Gandhi lost power, we haven't had leadership of that boldness.
So you're saying that even the men or women who've come to power with conviction haven't had the quality of leadership to push their conviction to fruition?
And not only that, they've not had the majority. If you think about it, since 1984, India has not had a government with a majority in a Lok Sabha, and therefore the coalition politics has made everybody
So there's been a problem at the level of the individual leader, there's been a problem at the level of the system itself, which hasn't given a majority. Is there another sort of problem? Let me, for a moment, quote your colleague Jagdish Bhagwati, who earlier this year in India said, you have to learn to live in flux, change, volatility. The old ways just will not do. Is Indian society scared of change?
It is very scared of change, but not so much Indian society. Indian society has to live with change. It's Indian politics, Indian state, which is trying to slow down change. Like King Canute, it is trying to say, don't come, sea waves, don't come to me. And it is crying against change because it's scared that it'll lose power.
You mean individual politicians, or perhaps the collectivity of politicians,
Yes.
are worried about what change will do to them and to a system that they've got comfortable operating? The new system will be difficult, it'll be at least experimental, and they won't know how to handle it.
Absolutely. They have been created from a patronage system that they have benefited from, and coalition politics, everybody is today's government and tomorrow's opposition, so they do not disturb each other.
What about something else, Lord Desai? In societies like Britain, where we're recording this interview during the Thatcher years, and more recently during the Blair years, intellectual debate provoked thinking. There was a ferment of ideas that was coming forward, and as a result, society kept throwing up solutions to the problems of reform, and reform proceeded with. That debate, that ferment, seems to be missing in India.
Well, in India, the problem is that the political system, the large political system, has hegemonized all intellectual debate. Government funds all the think tanks. What India needs is think tanks which would not take a single penny from the government, be independent, be critical, and not be afraid of being sort of bullied by the powers that be. Now, that is what in Britain caused a real change. The people were setting up think tanks on their own, very entrepreneurial, very young people, and 2 or 3 people in an office, and they were launching new ideas, not worrying whether the government in power or opposition party was taking them up or not.
So in contrast, in India, you have an intelligentsia that's in a sense been bought out, a comprador intelligentsia, not an independent one.
Absolutely. The government hegemonizes the whole intellectual landscape so much that there is nowhere to escape for a true intellectual, except abroad.
Let's take a break at this point. Let's come back in part 2 and ask you, how effectively is the government in India today tackling the challenge of economic reform, or is it in fact failing to do so, and is that the real problem? We'll be back in a moment's time. Stick with us. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with Lord Meghnad Desai. Lord Desai, how disillusioned are you by the manner in which the Indian government is tackling and pursuing the reforms agenda?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm disillusioned. I never had great expectations because having watched Indian reform through its many cycles, the system has limited capacity for bold reform. It gets tired, it gets afraid. Coalition politics take over and people immediately start to not disturb things too much.
Because politicians aren't committed to reform, you had no expectations, and also because they're not committed to reform, they can get easily deflected by compulsions of coalition politics, or any other compulsion for that matter. Is it the absence of conviction that is the problem? They don't believe in reform?
No, I think some people believe in reform. I'm sure that the Prime Minister, the present Prime Minister, very much believes in reform. The team Manmohan believes in reform. But the team Manmohan operates in a coalition context. And I think they're trying to do it in a subtle way. You know, in British playground, you have a thing called dodgems. I don't know if you've seen them. When you're in a dodgem car, you have to, all your effort is avoiding collision with another person driving a car.
And that's exactly what Dr. Manmohan Singh is
exactly what Dr. Manmohan Singh has been doing. He's trying his best, and then suddenly a big beast like DMK comes.
I want very much to talk about how good is his best, but before I ask you that particular question, how disappointed were you by the decision to put disinvestment on hold?
Well, I would say I was mildly disappointed, but not surprised, because the whole thing...
Because you weren't expecting it actually in the first place.
And the whole strategy of Dr. Singh has been to do it stealthily, quietly, not trying to raise the fear of change among people. He knows where he's going, but can he get there the way he wants to?
Well, You say he knows where he's going. The question is, can he get there? On the other hand, he's doing it by stealth, and so one has to assume there is, in fact, a plan behind the stealth. Let me quote to you what he said in a recent interview during the month of July to the Economic Times in India. I am not unambiguously attached to reforms. I am not enamored of India copying the Western style. That is certainly not an option for us when we talk of reforms. What do you make of that?
I think he is being a politician at that stage. You know, it's sort of, he was getting quite a lot of reform done. He got the airports done despite CPM. He thought he would get naval lignite done, and suddenly DMK won the election. Who was expecting that? And once DMK had won the election, they wanted to assert that they were the big boys in
All right,
town.
you're suggesting that this is political doublespeak. In a way, some people would say, well, maybe the good doctor is learning the art of saying different things to different people and ensuring he avoids obstacles. But let me carry on and quote something else that he said in the same interview. It seems that he has doubts about what India can actually achieve. You see, he said, when we talk of growth and catching up with the West, we must be aware that in the end, only a small proportion of the population will enjoy Western standards of living and high consumption. Can India not make Western lifestyles available to all its people?
Absolutely.
It can.
It can.
Well, he seems to doubt it.
Well, I think he is, in my view again, trying to not raise a specter of rapid growth, because he knows, I'm trying to second guess, he knows that if he again starts talking about 15% growth, the left, the DMK will start saying, what does he want?
So this is political rather than a change of view.
This is a political thing. I mean, in a sense...
This is Dodgem.
This is Dodgem. This is Dodgem. This is a man who has learned politics, who was not a politician when he became Prime Minister.
You're giving him the benefit of the doubt. You're certainly suggesting that he's picked up the way of handling politicians, even if as a result his economic reforms are suffering. But again, let me continue with that same interview, because in that interview you get the feeling that Dr. Singh is inexplicably unambitious for India. You see, he says he wants India to become a modern, self-sufficient country at a per capita income of $1,500. Can you be modern and self-sufficient at a per capita income of $1,500?
I think self-sufficiency is a mirage. No modern economy can ever be self-sufficient.
And at $1,500 per capita, it's not just a mirage, it's impossible.
But if you don't put a date on it,
he
cannot possibly believe that this is the eventual destination of Indian economy. I mean, I know, I don't know, maybe the footnotes are missing, but the thing is, our expectations 10 years ago were so modest that we constantly outgrow expectations.
But he sounds as if he's trapped by older expectations. He hasn't in the last 10 years adjusted them, because instead of dreaming big for India, which a Prime Minister should do, he's clipping and pruning his own ambition for his country.
This is the man who 3 months ago was saying 10% growth rate was possible, 15% growth rate in manufacturing was possible. I think it is 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Well, let's hope it's 2 steps forward, 1 back, and not sometimes 2 back and half a step forward.
It's a zigzag. It's very much a zigzag story. And I know one thing, that being an economist whom I've known for a long time, he clearly knows what's required for the Indian economy to grow.
But again, that's what I'm questioning. You see, he even betrays a fairly strange monastic streak in his thinking. He says, austerity is a necessity that is built into our social and economic fabric. We must adopt Gandhi's...
This is a Varda speech. This is a Varda speech. When you go to Varda, you talk about austerity. I mean, when you go to Mumbai, you talk about prosperity. I'm sorry.
Can the Indian economy...
I'm very skeptical about these.
You're skeptical of these things?
I'm very skeptical.
So you believe that Indian society can handle and absorb greater consumption and luxury? It won't fall apart if luxurious living is introduced?
Indian society is the most materialistic society going. When it was poor, people were poor not by choice, but by compulsion. Just look at our shopping malls in Delhi.
And because they are so poor, they need material acquisition to bring them up to acceptable standards of life.
Absolutely.
In other words, materialism is a necessity because of the absence of material in their lives.
We have no need to worship poverty. Only the rich worship poverty. The poor don't.
In which case, we have just about a minute left. What is your message to Dr. Manmohan Singh?
Good luck. Always know that your direction has to be forward, pro-reform. If you have to faint and hide, but don't believe that reforms are no good.
But would you also say that the time has come for him to stand up and fight for the things you believe he believes in, even though sometimes he doesn't seem to suggest it in what he says in interviews, and that the time has come to battle for his convictions rather than dodge them?
No, I would say just go forward. How you go forward is your choice. It's no good having a charge on a live brigade and getting slaughtered.
But go forward nonetheless.
Go forward nonetheless.
That's something he sometimes doesn't seem to do. You're saying keep moving forward every step counts.
Absolutely. And good luck to him, because he has to move forward for the sake of India's poorest people.
There is no alternative for India's future but to go forward.
Absolutely.
And that's your final message to him.
Indeed.
Dr. Meghnad Desai, a pleasure talking to you on Devil's Advocate.
Thank you.